A customer refused to let me serve them, and my manager quietly asked me to switch tables. I was holding a tray of water glasses when I heard her say it. Not to me. Never to me directly. That would have required acknowledging I existed as something more than a problem to be solved. She said it to my manager, Richard, in that stage whisper people use when they want you to hear, but maintain plausible deniability. I'd prefer someone else. 5 syllables that made the ice in those glasses rattle, though my hands hadn't moved. Richard's face did something I'd never seen before, this microscopic flinch, like he'd been slapped, but was pretending he hadn't. Then he turned to me with this carefully blank expression and said, "Liam, why don't you take table 9 instead? I'll have Kelly cover this section." The dining room kept moving around us, silverware clinking, conversations humming, the kitchen doors swinging open and shut. Normal sounds. Everything normal except the fact that my manager had just asked me to disappear because a customer didn't want a black server. I'd been working at Meridian's for almost 3 years. Started as a busser my sophomore year of college, worked my way up to server, became one of the most requested staff members for the private dining events. I had regulars who asked for me by name. I knew the menu backward and forward, could recommend wine pairings that made people's eyes light up, could read a table's mood in 30 seconds and adjust my approach accordingly. The owner, Anthony Castellano, had told me 6 months ago that I was being considered for a shift supervisor position. "You've got the instincts, Liam," he'd said. "You read people better than anyone I've trained." I'd been proud of that. Built something there. The restaurant was in downtown Minneapolis, upscale but not pretentious, the kind of place where anniversary dinners happened next to business deals. I thought I understood how the world worked there. I thought merit mattered. I thought I'd earned something that couldn't be taken away by 5 syllables from a woman in a designer dress. But standing there with that tray, watching Richard avoid my eyes, I felt something crack in my chest that I didn't have words for yet. Kelly appeared from the kitchen, blonde ponytail swinging, saw the situation immediately because she'd worked there almost as long as I had. Her face went red. "Richard, you can't be serious." He didn't answer her either, just put his hand on my shoulder with this horrible gentleness, like I was something fragile that might shatter. "Liam, table 9. Please." His voice had this edge that told me he wasn't asking. So I went. I took table 9, a nice older couple celebrating their anniversary, and I smiled and recommended the duck breast and poured their wine and did everything exactly right, while my brain screamed at me that I'd just been demoted to second-class citizen in a place where I'd given 3 years of perfect service. The couple left me a $40 tip on a $100 check. They told me I'd made their evening special. Then I watched Kelly serve the woman at table 6, watched her get a 12% tip and no compliments, and I thought about justice and karma and whether any of it actually existed. I didn't say anything to anyone that night. What would I even say? That a customer had exercised her right to request a different server? That my manager had accommodated a paying customer's preference? Those were the words that would get used in any official conversation, stripped of context and meaning, sanitized into something defensible. I'd grown up in South Minneapolis, raised by my mom after my dad died when I was 8. She'd worked 2 jobs to keep us in a decent school district, and she'd taught me early that you pick your battles. "Being right doesn't pay the rent, baby," she'd said more times than I could count. So I kept my mouth shut and finished my shift and drove home to my apartment, and I didn't let myself think about it until I was in the shower at 1 in the morning with hot water beating against my back and nobody around to see my face. It happened again on Thursday. Different customer, same script. This time it was a business lunch, 3 people in suits, and when I approached the table, the one in the center, middle-aged white guy, expensive watch, literally put his hand up. Stop sign, universal symbol for not you. Richard materialized like he'd been summoned, and this time he didn't even look apologetic. Just tired. "Liam, trade with Nicole for table 12. Nicole was new, barely 3 weeks in, still fumbling with the point-of-sale system. I watched her struggle through that table's order, watched her forget to offer bread service, watched her spill water when she was refilling glasses. They left her a 25% tip anyway and complimented her to Richard on their way out. Professional courtesy, they called it. She'd been so attentive. I'd been serving table 12, a family with 2 small kids who spilled things every 4 minutes and needed constant attention. They left me 8% and complained that I'd been inattentive. The math of it was suffocating. By the 3rd time, I'd started documenting. Nothing dramatic, just notes in my phone. Date, time, table number, what was said or not said, who was involved. I didn't know what I was going to do with the information. Maybe nothing. Maybe I just needed to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining the pattern. Saturday night, peak dinner service, we're slammed. I'm assigned to a 4-top that just sat down, 2 couples, dressed for a nice evening out. I grab menus and head over, and before I can even say, "Good evening," one of the women actually recoils, pulls back like I've brought something contagious to the table. Her husband has the decency to look uncomfortable, but he still does it. Flags Richard down, requests a different server who might be a better fit for their evening. That exact phrase, like I'm a wine pairing gone wrong. Richard's jaw tightens this time. I see it, this flash of something that might be shame or anger or both, but he nods. "Of course. Liam, take the bar section tonight." The bar section on a Saturday night is 15 seats of pure chaos, people ordering complicated cocktails and appetizers. Constant turnover. It's where you put servers you're punishing or testing. I made it through that shift on autopilot, and when I got to my car afterward, I just sat there in the dark parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at nothing. My phone buzzed. Text from Kelly. "We need to talk about what's happening. This isn't okay." I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say? That I'd noticed? That every time I got reassigned, I felt like I was being erased? That I went home and looked at job listings and wondered if this was just how it would be everywhere? I was 24 years old. I had 1 year left on my communications degree at the University of Minnesota. I'd thought I was building towards something, that hard work and excellence mattered. Now I was learning a different lesson entirely, and I hated every minute of it. The documentation in my phone had 11 entries, 11 times in 3 weeks. I'd gone from one of the highest earning servers to barely making rent because I kept getting the worst sections, the smallest tabs, the tables nobody wanted. Meanwhile, Richard was scheduling me for the busiest shifts, the ones where he needed bodies but could hide me in corners. The breaking point came on a Wednesday in October. We had a private event booked, a rehearsal dinner for 25 people, and I was supposed to be the lead server. I'd taken the reservation myself, talked to the bride's mother on the phone 3 times, customized the menu, coordinated everything. This was exactly the kind of event Anthony had said would prepare me for the supervisor role. I showed up an hour early to set up, and Richard was already there with this look on his face that made my stomach drop. "Change of plans," he said. "I need you on the floor tonight. Marcus is going to handle the private event." I stood there holding table linens and trying to process what he'd just said. Marcus, who'd been there 6 months, who forgot orders and mixed up tables and had absolutely zero experience with events this size. "Richard," I said carefully, "I've been coordinating this for 6 weeks. The family is expecting me." He wouldn't meet my eyes. "The family specifically requested a change. I'm sorry, Liam. It's out of my hands." The breaking point came on a Wednesday in October. We had a private event booked, a rehearsal dinner for 25 people, and I was supposed to be the lead server. I'd taken the reservation myself, talked to the bride's mother on the phone 3 times, customized the menu, coordinated everything. This was exactly the kind of event Anthony had said would prepare me for the supervisor role. I showed up an hour early to set up, and Richard was already there with this look on his face that made my stomach drop. "Change of plans," he said. "I need you on the floor tonight. Dylan is going to handle the private event." I stood there holding table linens and trying to process what he'd just said. Dylan, who'd been there 6 months, who forgot orders and mixed up tables and had absolutely zero experience with events this size. "Richard," I said carefully, "I've been coordinating this for 6 weeks. The family is expecting me." He wouldn't meet my eyes. "The family specifically requested a change. I'm sorry, Liam. It's out of my hands." That's when I stopped pretending this was normal. That's when I stopped telling myself to pick my battles and keep my head down and wait for things to get better. Because they weren't going to get better. I was being systematically erased from my own job, and my manager was letting it happen. And if I didn't do something, I was going to wake up one day and realize I'd been slowly pushed out entirely. I called my mom that night, told her everything. She listened in silence, and when I finished, she said, "Baby, you need to talk to a lawyer. Not tomorrow. Now." Her voice had this quality I'd only heard a few times in my life, steel wrapped in love. "They're creating a hostile work environment. They're costing you money. This is discrimination, Liam. You document everything, you hear me? Everything." I'd been documenting, but I hadn't been thinking about it in those terms. Discrimination, hostile work environment, legal words. Words that meant this was real and actionable and not just something I had to endure. I found an employment attorney through a referral from one of my professors. Her name was Diana Thornton, and she had 17 years of experience with workplace discrimination cases. We met in her office on a Friday afternoon, and I brought printouts of everything. My phone documentation, my schedule changes, my tip records showing the dramatic decline, emails about the events I'd been removed from. She went through it all with this expression that got progressively darker, making notes in precise handwriting. When she finished, she looked up at me and said, "Liam, this is one of the clearest patterns I've seen. They're not even trying to hide it. How many other staff members of color work at Meridians?" I had to think about it. In front of house? One other server, Jasmine, but she only works weekday lunches. The hostess, Keiko. That's it. Diana wrote that down. "And how are they treated?" I didn't know. I'd been so focused on my own situation that I hadn't been paying attention. That made me feel worse somehow. Diana explained the process. First, we'd file a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. That would create an official record and start an investigation. Then, depending on how the restaurant responded, we might move forward with a lawsuit. "I'll be honest with you," she said, leaning forward with her hands clasped on the desk. "These cases are hard. Employment discrimination is notoriously difficult to prove because employers can always claim they had legitimate business reasons. But you've got documentation, you've got a pattern, and you've got quantifiable financial harm. That matters." She quoted me her fee structure, $2,500 up front, then a percentage of any settlement or judgment. I had $1,800 in my checking account. She must have seen something in my face because she added, "We can work out a payment plan. Don't let money stop you from doing this. They're counting on that. I signed the retainer agreement that day. Walked out of her office feeling like I'd just stepped off a cliff. There was no going back now. This was public. This was official. This was me saying out loud that I'd been discriminated against and demanding that someone do something about it. The EEOC complaint went in on Monday. Diana told me it could take months to get a response, that investigations moved slowly, that I needed to be patient and keep documenting everything. And Liam, she said on the phone, don't quit. I know it's going to be hard, but if you quit, it makes their case easier. They'll say you chose to leave. Stay if you can. Document if you can't. So I stayed. Went to work on Wednesday night like nothing had changed. Took my section in the back corner where Richard had started putting me by default. Smiled at customers who didn't look at me twice. The restaurant found out about the complaint within 2 weeks. I don't know how. Maybe the EEOC contacted them. Maybe word just travels. But I knew the second I walked in for my Thursday shift because the atmosphere had changed. Richard wouldn't look at me at all now. Anthony called me into his office before service started, and sitting there with him was someone I'd never seen before. Late 50s, gray suit, briefcase. Liam, this is Gregory Hoffman from our legal team, Anthony said. His voice was different, formal, like we hadn't spent 3 years building what I thought was mutual respect. We've been made aware of some concerns you've raised. Gregory Hoffman opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Mr. Carter, we take allegations of discrimination very seriously. I'd like to understand your perspective on what's been happening. It was a trap. Every instinct I had screamed trap. Diana had warned me about this exact scenario. Don't talk to them without me present, she'd said. They'll try to get you to say something they can use against you. I stood up. I appreciate the concern, Mr. Hoffman, but I'm going to have to refer you to my attorney, Diana Thornton. I put her business card on Anthony's desk. I'm happy to participate in any formal investigation, but I won't be having informal conversations about an active legal matter. Gregory's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Calculation, maybe. Anthony looked stunned, like I'd violated some unspoken rule by bringing lawyers into what he probably saw as a family business matter. Liam, he started, but I was already moving toward the door. I have a shift to work, unless you're telling me I don't? Silence. Then Anthony said, No, you're scheduled. We'll be in touch. I made it to the bathroom before my hands started shaking. Made it through an entire shift on pure adrenaline, hyper-aware of every interaction, every word, knowing that everything I did now would be scrutinized and weaponized. Things got worse after that. Not dramatically, they were too smart for that, but in small, calculated ways. My schedule got cut from 5 shifts to 3. When I asked Richard about it, he said they were adjusting coverage based on business needs. My section assignments got worse. I started getting tables near the kitchen and the bathrooms, the spots where you make the least money because people don't want to sit there. When I checked the schedule, I noticed Kelly and Nicole and Dylan were all getting prime real estate, the window tables and the corners with ambiance. The math was clear. They were strangling my income without firing me, making it financially impossible to stay. Diana called it constructive discharge when I told her. They're creating conditions so intolerable that you'll have no choice but to quit, and then they can claim you left voluntarily. It's illegal, and it's exactly what we're going to prove. She filed an amendment to the EEOC complaint documenting the retaliation. I started recording everything. Minnesota is a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record conversations I was part of without telling the other person. I bought a small digital recorder, the kind that looks like a pen, and I kept it in my shirt pocket during every shift. I recorded Richard assigning sections. I recorded customer interactions. I recorded the staff meeting where Anthony announced new policies about server assignments that somehow always resulted in me getting the worst spots. I backed everything up to the cloud every night. Diana had said documentation was our weapon, so I was building an arsenal. I also started noticing things I'd missed before. The way Richard would steer certain customers away from my section, even when I had open tables. The way the hostess, Keiko, would apologize to me quietly when she had to seat people elsewhere. It's not my choice, she whispered once. He tells me who goes where. I asked her if she'd be willing to talk to my lawyer. She looked terrified and shook her head. I need this job, Liam. I'm sorry. The recording that changed everything happened on a Saturday in early November. We were busy, full dining room, and I was working my reduced section in the back. A new table sat down, couple in their 50s, well-dressed, ordering wine before they even looked at food menus. I approached with my usual opening, and the man interrupted me. Excuse me, is there a manager available? Red flag. But I smiled and said, Of course, let me grab him for you. Found Richard at the server station, told him table 18 wanted to speak with him. He walked over, and I watched from a distance. Watched the man gesture at me. Watched Richard nod and say something reassuring. Then Richard came back and said, Liam, I need you to let Alex handle table 18. Same script as always. Except this time I had my recorder running, and this time I didn't just walk away. Can I ask why? I said, keeping my voice level. Richard glanced around, lowered his voice. The guest has a preference. Let's just make this smooth, okay? I pressed. What kind of preference? He actually said it. They're more comfortable with someone else. Don't make this difficult. I nodded and walked away, and later when I played back that recording, I could hear it clear as anything. They're more comfortable with someone else. Code words, euphemisms. But Diana said it would be enough. Except it wasn't just about me anymore. I started paying attention to Jasmine, the other black server. She worked weekday lunch shifts, mostly business crowds, and when I actually looked at her schedule, I realized she was being managed exactly the same way I was. Short shifts, bad sections, constant reassignments. I approached her in the break room on a Wednesday, asked her if she'd noticed anything unusual about how she was being treated. The way her face changed told me everything. You too? She said quietly. We compared notes. She'd been there 2 years, had also been promised advancement, had also seen her income drop mysteriously over the past few months. I thought I was imagining it, she said. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. I told her about Diana, about the EEOC complaint. Told her she could join the complaint if she wanted to. She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her doing the same calculation I'd done. Money, risk, justice, fear. Let me think about it, she finally said. She called Diana the next day. The EEOC investigation took 3 months. 3 months of working in an increasingly hostile environment, of watching my paychecks shrink, of second-guessing every interaction. Diana kept telling me we were building a case, that every incident of retaliation just strengthened our position, but living through it felt like drowning slowly. My mom offered to loan me money. My friends told me to quit and find something else. But I couldn't. Not because I loved the job anymore, that was long gone, but because quitting felt like letting them win, like agreeing that I was the problem, that I deserved to be pushed out. So I showed up, and I documented, and I waited. Jasmine did the same. We became this quiet alliance, comparing notes, backing each other up, bearing witness. When Kelly tried to give me her tip money one night because she felt guilty about getting my old section, I told her to join the complaint instead. She did. Suddenly we were 3. The EEOC investigator was a woman named Patricia Okonkwo, and she came to the restaurant twice, once to interview management, once to interview staff. I wasn't present for the management interviews, but Diana told me later they'd claimed everything was performance-based, that my reduced schedule was due to customer complaints they conveniently couldn't produce documentation for, that the section assignments were random. They showed the investigator spreadsheets and schedules that allegedly proved fair distribution of shifts. But when Patricia interviewed staff separately, a different picture emerged. Kelly told her about the customers who specifically requested white servers. Nicole confirmed that she'd been given my private event assignments despite having less experience. Even some of the kitchen staff talked about overhearing Richard and Anthony discussing how to handle the situation without creating legal exposure. Patricia Okonkwo had deadpan eyes and a way of asking questions that made people forget to lie. By the time she finished her investigation, Diana said we had enough to pursue legal action. The restaurant's first settlement offer came in January. $15,000, split between Jasmine and me, with a non-disclosure agreement and a requirement that we resign. Diana laughed when she read it to me over the phone. They're insulting us. You've lost more than that in tips alone. We're going to court. Court. The word sat in my stomach like a stone. Court meant discovery, depositions, public records. It meant my name and face attached to this forever. It meant risk. But it also meant the possibility of real accountability, real consequences, real change. We filed the lawsuit in February. Jasmine Carter and Liam Thompson versus Meridian's Restaurant and Anthony Castellano, alleging racial discrimination, hostile work environment, and retaliation. The local news picked it up within 24 hours. Suddenly, my private battle was public consumption. My phone started ringing, reporters wanting interviews, advocacy groups offering support, anonymous numbers I didn't answer because I didn't know who they were or what they wanted. The restaurant filed a motion to dismiss. Their lawyer, Gregory Hoffman, argued that we hadn't proven intentional discrimination, that customer preference wasn't the same as employer discrimination, that the schedule changes were legitimate business decisions. The judge denied the motion. We moved into discovery, which meant both sides had to produce documents. Diana subpoenaed everything: 3 years of schedules, tip reports, customer complaints, internal communications, employee reviews. What we found was damning. Email chains between Richard and Anthony discussing how to minimize visibility of certain servers. Text messages between Richard and the hostess explicitly telling her to seat particular tables with white servers. Customer comment cards that mentioned race and were filed away instead of addressed. A pattern so clear, it was like reading a manual on how to discriminate without getting caught. Almost. They'd gotten caught. We had them. Discovery also meant depositions. I sat in a conference room for 6 hours while Gregory Hoffman asked me questions designed to make me look like a disgruntled employee with a persecution complex. He asked about every mistake I'd ever made at work, every customer complaint, every time I'd called in sick. He asked about my college grades, my financial situation, whether I'd ever applied for jobs elsewhere. He tried to get me to admit I'd been underperforming, that I'd deserved the schedule cuts, that maybe I'd misinterpreted innocent actions. Diana had prepared me for this. Don't get defensive. Don't get emotional. Just answer the questions factually. I did. 6 hours of yes, no, I don't recall. That's not accurate. While a court reporter typed every word, and my future hung on whether I could stay calm enough not to give them ammunition. When it was over, Diana squeezed my shoulder. You did great. They've got nothing. But I felt hollowed out, scraped clean, like I'd been turned inside out and examined for flaws. The depositions of Richard and Anthony were different. I wasn't allowed in the room, but Diana recorded them and played me key sections afterward. Richard, asked directly if he'd ever accommodated customer requests for white servers, said, I may have made staffing adjustments based on customer feedback, yes. Asked what kind of feedback, he said, various preferences, dietary needs, personality types, that sort of thing. Asked specifically about race, he said, I don't recall race being a factor. But when Diana played him the recording I'd made, his own voice saying, they're more comfortable with someone else, right after a customer had gestured at me, he couldn't explain it. Stammered about context and misunderstandings and how it sounded worse than it was. Anthony's deposition was worse. He admitted he'd known about customer requests for white servers, admitted he'd told Richard to handle it discreetly, admitted he'd never reported these incidents as discrimination or offered racial sensitivity training. When asked why not, he said, the customer is always right. That's business. Diana said those 4 words, the customer is always right, would probably cost him everything. The case was scheduled for trial in June. But in May, something unexpected happened. A former server named Claire Stevenson reached out to Diana. Claire had worked at Meridian's 3 years ago, before my time, and she'd quit after experiencing the exact same pattern I had. She'd never filed a complaint because she didn't think anyone would believe her. But when she saw our case in the news, she contacted Diana with her own documentation. Emails, schedules, even a journal she'd kept describing incidents. She was white, which complicated things, but her documentation showed that Meridian's had a pattern of accommodating racist customer requests that went back years. Diana filed a motion to include Claire's testimony. The restaurant's lawyers fought it, but the judge allowed it as evidence of a systematic practice. Suddenly, our case wasn't just about Jasmine and me. It was about institutional racism that the restaurant had enabled and profited from. The week before trial, the restaurant made a second settlement offer. $250,000, split between Jasmine and me. No non-disclosure agreement. A requirement that they implement mandatory anti-discrimination training for all staff. A requirement that they establish clear policies against accommodating discriminatory customer requests. And a requirement that they rehire us with back pay and priority scheduling if we wanted to return. Diana presented it over the phone, and I sat there in my apartment trying to process numbers that would change my life. $250,000. I could pay off my student loans. I could finish my degree without working. I could breathe. But there was something else I wanted more than money. What about accountability? I asked. Does Anthony admit what he did? Diana was quiet for a moment. The settlement includes a statement that they acknowledge systemic failures in their policies and are committed to ensuring all employees are treated equitably. It's not an admission of guilt, but it's close. Not close enough. I called Jasmine, told her about the offer, asked what she wanted to do. She said, I don't care about going back there, Liam. I want the money and I want them to have to change, but if you need the trial, I'm with you. I loved her for that, for understanding that this had become about something bigger than either of us. I called Diana back and said, counteroffer. Same money, same policy changes, but Anthony Castellano has to make a public statement acknowledging that the restaurant engaged in racial discrimination and apologizing to affected employees. Not corporate speak. A real apology. Diana laughed. You know they'll never go for that. I said, then we go to trial. She called back 2 days later. They accepted. Anthony will issue a statement to be published on the restaurant's website and social media. You get final approval on the language. I couldn't believe it. Neither could Jasmine. We were getting everything. Money, policy changes, and public acknowledgement. Justice, maybe. As close as it gets in the real world. The statement went live on a Thursday in June. Anthony Castellano, standing in Meridian's dining room with no customers, reading from a prepared script while a camera recorded. I want to address serious failings in how this restaurant has operated. Over the past several years, Meridian's accommodated customer requests that were based on racial prejudice. We allowed servers of color to be removed from tables because customers expressed discomfort with being served by black staff. This was wrong. This was discriminatory. And I take full responsibility for creating an environment where this was allowed to happen. I apologize to Liam Thompson, Jasmine Carter, and any other employees who were harmed by these practices. We are implementing comprehensive changes to ensure this never happens again, including mandatory anti-discrimination training and clear policies that we will not accommodate requests based on race, religion, or any protected characteristic. I am committed to making Meridians a place where all staff members are valued and respected equally. The video was 90 seconds long. It went viral within hours. The comments section became a battlefield. People who'd eaten at Meridian's defending Anthony, saying he was being railroaded by political correctness. People sharing their own stories of workplace discrimination, of being judged by their skin color, of fighting for dignity in places that saw them as less than. The local news covered it. National outlets picked it up. Suddenly, Meridian's restaurant wasn't just a nice place for dinner in downtown Minneapolis. It was a case study in how discrimination hides in plain sight. How customer preference becomes a weapon. How good people can enable terrible things by choosing comfort over courage. Some people called for boycotts. Others showed up to eat there specifically to support the changes. I watched it all from a distance, my phone blowing up with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years, everyone wanting to know how I felt, what it all meant. I didn't know how to answer. I felt vindicated and exhausted and angry and sad all at the same time. The settlement money hit my account in July. $125,000. More money than I'd ever seen in my life. I paid off my student loans first. $32,000 gone in one transaction, years of debt erased. Then I paid my mom back for every time she'd helped me with rent or groceries or car repairs, plus interest she refused to accept until I threatened to give it to charity instead. I put $50,000 in savings. I used the rest to finish my degree full-time without working, something I'd never imagined possible. Jasmine bought a house. Actually bought a house at 26, which should have been impossible on a server's salary, but suddenly wasn't, because justice had come with a check attached. We met for coffee in August, sat in a cafe near campus, and tried to figure out what we'd won and what we'd lost. "I can't go back there," she said. "I know the settlement says we can, but I can't walk into that building and pretend everything's fine." I understood. Neither could I. Kelly texted me in September. "Richard quit. Just turned in his notice today, no explanation. Anthony is managing the floor himself now." I felt something complicated reading that. Satisfaction mixed with something that might have been pity. Richard had been the instrument of discrimination, but he'd also been taking orders. He'd made choices that destroyed people's livelihoods because confronting his boss or his customers felt too hard, and now he was living with that. I wondered if he'd apologized to the people he'd hurt, or if he'd just moved on to a different restaurant where he'd make the same choices because they were easier. I wondered if he understood that just following orders wasn't a defense, wasn't an excuse, wasn't anything except a coward's abdication of responsibility. Probably not. People like Richard rarely did. The policy changes at Meridian's were real. Diana had built enforcement mechanisms into the settlement: quarterly audits, mandatory reporting, financial penalties if they violated the terms. Anthony hired a diversity consultant, implemented the training, created a formal complaint process, put up a statement in the employee break room about their commitment to equality. I heard through the server grapevine that the culture had shifted, that people felt safer speaking up, that the hostess would now push back when customers made inappropriate requests. Whether it would last beyond the settlement period, I didn't know. Institutional change is fragile. It requires constant attention and willingness to choose principle over profit. But for now, at least, the servers working at Meridian's had protections Jasmine and I had fought for. That mattered. That was something. I graduated the following May, bachelor's degree in communications, honors distinction, a year later than planned, but finished. My mom cried at the ceremony, told me she was proud of how I'd stood up for myself, how I'd refused to disappear quietly. "Your daddy would have been so proud," she said, and I believed her. My dad had been a union organizer before he died, had spent his life fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. I'd inherited that from him, apparently. The inability to walk away from injustice even when it would have been easier, even when it cost me. I got offers from 3 different nonprofit organizations doing workplace advocacy and discrimination prevention. Chose one based in Minneapolis that worked specifically with service industry workers. The pay was less than I could have made in corporate communications, but the work felt important. Felt like using what I'd learned, what I'd survived, to help other people navigate the same systems that had tried to break me. I went back to Meridian's once, about a year after the settlement. Not to eat, I couldn't stomach that, but to drop off a letter I'd written to the current staff. It was late afternoon, between lunch and dinner service, and the dining room was empty except for a few people doing prep work. I left the letter with the hostess, a young woman I didn't recognize, and walked out without looking around. The letter talked about knowing your worth, about documentation and finding good lawyers, about how customer preference is never an excuse for discrimination, and anyone who tells you otherwise is protecting themselves, not you. I didn't know if anyone would read it. Didn't know if it would matter. But I'd needed to say it anyway, needed to reach back and offer something to the people still fighting battles I'd already won. The anniversary of that first incident, the woman who'd said, "I'd prefer someone else," came and went. 2 years. I spent it at my new job, reviewing a complaint from a housekeeper who'd been fired after refusing to clean a hotel room where the guest had made racist comments. Straightforward case, clear documentation, the kind of thing I could handle in my sleep now. I contacted an attorney I knew who specialized in hospitality industry discrimination, explained the situation, set up a meeting with the housekeeper, started building a case. The work was familiar by now: documentation, evidence, patterns, testimony, the legal machinery that ground slow but could grind fine if you fed it properly. I was good at this. Turned out getting discriminated against and fighting back had given me a very specific skill set, and there was no shortage of people who needed it. Sometimes I still thought about that tray of water glasses, the way the ice had rattled when I'd heard those 5 syllables, the way Richard's face had flinched, the way I'd felt myself being erased in real time, reduced from a person to a problem to be managed. That feeling had been the beginning of everything that came after. The documentation, the lawyer, the lawsuit, the settlement, the career change. All of it traced back to that moment when I'd had to choose between accepting erasure or fighting back. I'd chosen to fight, and it had cost me sleep and money and peace of mind in 3 years of my life. But I'd won. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough to change things for the people who came after me. Enough to sleep at night knowing I hadn't let them make me disappear. That had to be enough. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.